1899. And when the First World War started, I was 14 years old. And the Germans, the Russians was afraid that if the Germans come closer, we'd help him to fight against the Russians. So they took all the German people out of Ukraine and took them way into Russia on the other side of the Volga. And that was a nice vicinity and different climate, naturally dry and cold in the wintertime and a lot of snow in the wintertime and so on. And they gave us all shelter, gave us food, and we was handled real good. There was no question about us being Germans in Russia and all this and that. We was just simply runaways from the war. That's all there was to it. They call them bejances, and they was nice people. They call them the High Russians. They was all tall and blonde, and nice-looking people and very nice behaved people. And me and my sisters, Lydia and Martha, if there was work to do, well, we did some work and made some money, and we all put it in together in one pool, and was an addition and help to what food the Russians gave us. So we got along real good, and everything was fine. Of course, we lost everything by us taken away. We couldn't sell any property or any cattle or any hogs or anything because the Jews was forbidden to buy the stuff and the Russians didn't buy it. So we had to leave everything, whether it's from chickens to hogs and cows and everything we had and buildings and everything was left right there. And nobody worried about it. There was no use worrying about it. And we just stayed there in Russia until the revolution come in Russia. That was in 1917. And then all the German people was allowed to go back to their own vicinities, to their own, wherever they had their homes. They thought they could go back and take up their lives again, but it didn't work that way because under communism, nobody owned anything, and only the buildings, that's all. But you couldn't say that didn't have the right to demand anything because you was just as much of a stranger to the place as the people that lived in there. We had houses in town, and we couldn't even get an apartment to move in ourselves, only through a Jew lawyer, that helped us to achieve that, and we had an apartment to go into, and that went on for a little while, and the German military authorities were still in the Ukraine, not moving out too fast because of the revolution, and they keep the peace, and then all the German people, they was just like a bird on a wing, and they couldn't go back in their own places because they was occupied from the Russian people, the Galicians, they call them, that came from Austria. Of course, they was in a strange country, and then the Russian government allowed them to take these farms over that the German people had, and when the German people come back and wanted to get into their places, why they was all occupied and taken. The only thing that they could do is sell the buildings. That's the only thing that they owned, really. They didn't own the land. They only paid minor taxes on the land. And then my dad did that. They sold what they could, the buildings and stuff, and put the money in a German bank. And then the revolution came in Germany in 1918. a year later, and then the money wasn't worth anything, and we didn't have nothing to show for what we put into life. I mean, and the money wasn't worth to buy a suit of clothes really, and then the idea came to come to United States, and we finally achieved that, got over here, and that's about the whole of it. And well, I don't know whether I forgot anything to mention some more or not.
Well, now, who came to the United States with you when you came?
Well, I got married in Germany. Yeah, I got married in Germany, and Norbert was born in Germany.
So how many brothers did you have?
I had two brothers, yeah, and they was in the United States. They moved away when they got to be 21 years old because of the military, and there wasn't much to begin on living on their own, so they went to the United States, and so they was here and they got along pretty good, and when they figured on coming to the United States, why we had relatives which was cousins of ours, and they sent us the visa, and we finally came over to the United States, and here we are.
Okay, now, when your dad was still living at this time, when
Yes,
did he come over?
he came over a month sooner than I did, and it didn't suit him to be live with me. He figured that, but it didn't work out very good. So my cousin, um, he wanted to go to my second oldest brother, and then my cousin fixed up the papers to have my brother Gus sign them, and then he took over the responsibility of my father, and then my father went to that was in Oregon. My brother lived in Oregon. That's where he went to stay, and that's where he died.
Okay, tell us about your mother, when she died.
Oh yeah, as we was on the way from going back to our vicinity, or our property, supposing our property, yeah, we before we got into the German, I mean at the border, before we got into Germany, we had to be stopped in what you call it Lausung or cleanliness. We had to be cleansed to be sure that we was without lice or bugs or anything. And there, I got sick there, and my mother took care of me. And then there was a lady across the room that was so sick, and nobody took care of her, and she was hysterical and go around out of the bed and running around. And my mother put her in the bed, and that's where my mother got sick. She caught a louse, she said, and she showed him to my dad and me. We slept in the same room, and that louse must have transferred the sickness into my mother, and that's when she died. In about 9 days, 10 days, she was dead, in a high fever.
Okay, I want Aunt Lydia to tell her version now of this particular occasion.
When, when Alex got into the hospital, he went in with pneumonia.
Yeah.
And when he was in the hospital, he developed yellow fever. They called it, in German, they call it Flecktyphus. And he was very sick, and he was delirious. He was out of his mind at that time. And of course, that's a very catching disease, very contagious.
Yeah.
And so nobody dared to go in or out. If you go in, you had to stay in.
Yeah.
And so my mother, she was worried about him so bad. So she went in and stayed in. And then she come down with the yellow fever. And she didn't live but 9 days, and she was gone. But Alex, he was young and strong.
Yeah.
He could fight that off. See, the yellow fever brings, blotches, they have big yellow blotches. When they come out, that is a sign that you can throw it off. And mother was old and she was weak and run down. She couldn't do that. She
Stayed
couldn't.
inside.
It stayed inside, and that's what she died from.
Okay. Tell me about your schooling. What you remember? What kind of school did you go
I
to?
didn't have no schooling whatsoever. What little schooling I had was in Russia before we was thrown, chased out of our homes. And I was very young at that time yet. I didn't have but 2 years of Russian school, and that was very little. And now I don't remember even the alphabet in Russian language.
Did you have any schooling, Dad?
They had schools and churches. The German people did, but they had to teach Russian and German too. So they taught Russian for half of the day and German for the other half a day.
So did you go to school?
I went to school, yes.
How
and,
long?
And then, well, I don't remember that. I suppose when I got to be 10, 11 years old, that was about the end of it, going to that school. But when we moved to town then, and that's where Dad built houses, and that's where I went to Russian school, complete Russian school, and I got a fairly good education out of it, good enough to call it as much as the eighth, they call here the
8th grade.
8th grade, yeah.
Now,
That's about what I got.
at that time, did they more dwell on men getting boys getting education than they did girls?
Yeah, but the parents, my father especially, he didn't believe in the women getting education. He says if a man can read and write, that's sufficient. So we had to stay home and take care of the cattle. We didn't have fences like over here. They put them out and the fences holding the cattle. We had to stay right with them from early in the morning till when we brought them back into the barns. We had to stay with the cattle. And when one was usually taking care of the cattle, and then we had geese, and then the other had to take care of the geese, and I was the one who usually had to take care of the geese.
That seems to be the thing that in those days, because I remember seeing this movie. These people were Jewish, and they wouldn't allow their daughters to go to school and learn anything. It was only the men. So
I don't think it had anything to do with that, but that was the way the people were brought up, because there was a very few people that had education, and the men, they thought, the women don't need no education, they get along without. So
It was not compulsory to go to school.
yeah.
It was up to the individual, but they had rules that we had to. Our teachers in school had to teach Russian the same time they did German.
Well, I wondered about that, because that's something we never talked about, was schooling.
The reason they did that because they didn't figure that the war was going to start and they're going to have to chase the people out. They figured that if the people are going to keep on living in Ukraine, they'd have to know how to take care of their business going to offices,
Yeah.
because there were so many people that didn't understand a word of Russian. They had to depend on the teacher in school or somebody that knew how to talk Russian. And the only thing they could do is talk German, that's all.
And then the women, too, they didn't go out to work. If they did housework or something like that. And they were trained to be wives and mothers, right?
yeah, but I don't know about going out to do housework. I don't remember that, because there was plenty to do. We was on a farm, and there was plenty to do on a farm, because my parents, they had a hired girl, to help with the housework and things.
Well, my mother used to say that she worked for other people in the home, so, yeah. So, can you think of anything else you'd like to tell about?
No, offhand, I don't. But anyway, it wasn't like it is out here. Over there, the women had to do most of the work, like doing the chores like feeding the cattle, but the men did that. But when it comes to milking the cows and things like that, the women had to do that. And in summertime, when there was in the harvest time, the men and the women they went out together and worked in the fields. When they come home, the women had to get the dinner on the table, so they had their lunch and things, and then they had to go out and milk the cows. They milked cows 3 times a day, and the men lay down and had their nap during the noon hour, and the women had to do the work. When we got through with the work, then they woke up the men, and then we went out in the field again, and that's the way it was from day to day in the summertime.
Tell us, you want to hold that? Tell us how you met your husband, John.
Oh, that was in Germany. He was working out like, I guess he didn't come to that part when we worked in Germany. But anyway, that's where I met him. We was all together. Alex worked there, and I, and Martha, and all of us. And Alex's wife worked there before they got married, and she had a sister and one brother, I remember. Or did she have 2 brothers? I don't remember. Did you? Did either have 2 brothers or 1 brother?
2 brothers.
True, that's what I thought. She had 1 sister and 2 brothers. They all worked in the same place, and that's why we got acquainted. And so eventually we got married.
So you got married in Germany,
Yes.
and then your children were all born here, or was Gertrude born in
Gertrude
Germany?
was born in Germany.
Okay. So in what year did you come over?
I come over in 25.
In 25. Do you remember the name of the ship?
I remember what?
The name of the ship.
No, I cannot tell you. I don't remember the name. I got a picture where the name is on it, but I don't.
Yeah.
Oh, just let me think a little bit. Oh, it's laying on my tongue. I can't mention
And what? Yes.
They said it was all right.
Okay.
They just want you to do this.
Yes. Yes.
And anyway, it took us 14 days to come across the ocean to get
14
here.
days. Did you get seasick?
No, I did. Yes, I did too. I was seasick. And Gertrude, she was just, when I come over, she was just a little tot, you know. And when I was seasick, she got out of the cabin where we were in. You know, each one had assigned the cabin where we stayed in. And when I woke up, she was gone, and I was so scared. I thought she had gone out and fallen overboard or something. When I come to the dining room, she sat by the table and eating with the rest of them.
That's something.
Yeah.
Yes, I can't really recall it.
Well, it doesn't matter. I just thought maybe you'd know, you know.
I knew, but then didn't have no reason to think about it. Also, finally forgot.
Yeah. So did you have any relatives left in Germany when you came over?
Oh yes. My wife's parents were still alive, and 1 daughter, 1 sister, and 2 brothers.
But no Abrahams were there yet.
No Abrahams, no. No, that was
Crumb.
their name was Krum.
Yeah.
Krum.
Yeah. Okay. Did any of
We had, now, like when we left, there was father's sister, but they were all driven out too. But we were all, after we were driven out, was all in different directions, and we lost track of them. We didn't see them and hear of them until after we got to the United States. We got somehow or another, I don't remember just how it come, but we got to know each other again. But they come to Germany, to the United States after the Second World War.
did any of John's family come to the United States?
No, his folks stayed there, and they was that was taken, the part where we used to live in, it was taken over by Poles. You know, the Poles took over, and it was Poland after that. And well, I never got to meet his folks. Never.
Wasn't John a Polish German?
You might say he's
Yeah.
Polish.
Yeah.
But he did talk very little Polish. He couldn't.
Well, just like with me, you
There was a lot
know.
of German people living in Poland.
Yeah. So. Well, we'll.
Now you hold that. You see, the Kaiser or the Tsar in Russia was a single prince.
Just a minute, Dad. Now you say this is how that who got into Ukraine? The Germans got into Ukraine.
Yeah.
This is how they got there.
No, yeah, that's how they got there. But I want to begin the reason for the thing to happen, you know. And he, of course, the royal family all over the world, it was all related, you know. And he went to Germany to marry a German princess, the Tsar
Of Russia.
of Russia, yes. And at that time, they traveled across country, and they didn't have any automobiles like we have, so they traveled in fancy horse-drawn, what you call carriages, yes, with a chauffeur naturally, and they went across country, and the princess that they married, seeing all this empty land, you know, and nobody using it, you know, and way up to the Volga, you know. If you have a globe and or read the history, the from Rovno is the closest to the German border, and from there all the way across Ukraine and into Russia behind the Volga was still Ukraine, you know. And they went to that territory, and the princess said, "Why don't you let people come in? They need land, and they're good farmers, and they would do the country some good." And that's what he did. He gave the order to let the German people come in, and they built buildings, and they got the land free. Naturally, they had to pay a few taxes, you know, which didn't amount to much. And of course, at that time, the young people stayed at home and with the family and worked with the family. And when everything went nice, why, their parents gave them a dowry. So my mother and my dad, each one of them got $1,500 at the time they wanted to get married. And with that money, they went to the Ukraine and took up land and built buildings and stocked it with tools and horses and cows. And they was full-fledged farmers, and they still had some money left over, you know. And so other people did the same thing. The young people would come, take up their own lives, you know, after they got married. Why, that was overpopulated in Poland and in Germany too, you know. And they all took up land, and therefore there was German colonies all over Ukraine. And that's where they were when they was chased out according to the war.
Well,
That's about the only thing that I can say.
we'll stop right now. If we think of more, we'll play it again later.
Hey, Dad, tell me about your mother. What kind of a person she was?
She was not a tall person. She might have been just a little bit taller than Lydia,
Yeah.
but she was heavy set, and she done everything. Should I tell you what she did?
Yeah, sure. That's
Well,
the interesting part.
She was the main part in the farming. Without her, the farm wouldn't have succeeded at all. She milked cows 3 times a day.
My
and
goodness, they must have gave a lot of milk 3 times a day.
Yeah, well, they figured that they get all the milk they can that way, you know, milk early in the morning, late at night, and once at noon.
Yeah.
And they prepared extra food in tubs, you know, big tubs, you know, that had handles on each side, and 2 people carried them into every one cow, you know. And this food was prepared from, well, they raised sugar beets, you know, big beets and all that stuff. To cut them up, part of it. Not, they don't give them all beets, but some beets, and bran from the grain, you know, and all this and that put together, and then to put hot water on, make a whole tub full for about 6, 7 cows or more. And each one of them had to be carried in, in the barn in the wintertime. That was when they fed them in the wintertime. And of course they rented, they hired a maid that worked there steady, with mother. And both of those women carried those tubs in, fed the cows, and milked them the same time they fed them,
That's when women were strong.
Yeah, and they sure was strong. And they did that year in, year out, every day in the wintertime.
Oh, boy.
And at least 3 months during the wintertime.
Yeah.
And
What were some of her other activities?
and
You talked about her.
in the summertime, well, there was work to be done out in the field. She'd go out in the field, and she'd, if nobody else, when I was not old enough yet, strong enough to use a scythe to cut the grain, why, she was out there with the sickle cutting the grain, bend over all day long.
Good heavens.
And laid it in bunches, and then be tied afterwards. And she done all that kind of work. Dad never done a labor's work, day's work.
He didn't help her,
in
huh?
his life.
He didn't help
I
her.
don't know, but he complained about his back.
Yeah.
But whether it was as bad as he thought, he made believe that it was, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I believe he made believe a lot. He didn't like to work like a laborman. He did, because he was growing up on a farm, and the man, they act as bosses all the time and supervisors, and he could, the supervising and boss, are very good, He knew how to lay out the land on a farm, to grow this and that, and that's what he did. He could do a lot of work that other people couldn't do,
Yeah.
But it's not strenuous.
Yeah.
And he done a lot of things. He was a pretty smart man.
Yeah.
But I think he was overdoing it a little bit by pulling himself away that he couldn't do a day's work.
Yeah.
I believe he could have done a day's work, but he'd go along in the field, and walk around and all this and that, but that's all he did,
Yeah, right.
So mother had to take the place of a man and a woman and everything put together.
Huh.
And when winter time comes along, why, they raise the flax, and then the flax had to be put in wets, outside water holes they had, and weighted down and keep it there for a certain length of time, so all this, well, have you never seen flax?
No.
Well, it's real little stems about that thick, And
Yeah.
only the outside of the stems is what's being used, and the inside is got to rot away,
Oh, yeah.
being in the water. And then when they take it out and dry it, they dry it and it gets dried to a crisp, And then they take this flax and beat it over a stand. It's a stand with a board, real worked out real fine and sharp, and hardwood, and it's taken over, and then you got a tool and you got to break that stuff and get that all out of the
From the
fiber,
inside, yeah.
Only the fiber is left.
Yeah.
And she cleaned that all out and get that ready, and then it's got to be going over a board with a lot of spikes in it, real fine spikes, and worked out so it's made it look like well, we'll say a thread type, and that had to be spun, and put on rollers, and then get ready to put on a weaving rig, and she get that all ready. But Dad set the rig up and all this and that.
He got her all set, but she did the work.
He knew everything
Yeah.
about those things,
Yeah,
you know.
uh-huh.
He could, well, him and my oldest brother, I've seen him do it, make their own ropes, you know. They have things that twists and turns their stuff, you know, and puts it in the ropes, you know. And
Now, what kind of material did they make the ropes out of?
I can't say that for linen. And they probably had more flex than they needed for weaving, so they used it for ropes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way, well, I can't describe it. You wouldn't understand how it works.
Yeah, well, that was
But
good.
the two men do it, you know. And that's the way in the olden times they used to do all their own stuff on a farm, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Not to pay out anything. The only thing that they could save any money from is from a little butter and cream and stuff, you know. And they'd save from the cows.
Yeah.
And of course they raised the food and they ate different than they do nowadays, you know. And had hogs and hogs meat and bacon and well, they raised all kinds of vegetables, you know, and everything like that. And we used a lot of liquid, very much liquid food, you know, like soups and everything, you know. And there was no chance of anybody getting constipated or anything.
Yeah.
And they had to be awful careful for in that well, what should I say? In that respect, because the doctors, there was no such a thing as a doctor that knew anything, you know. If there was a doctor, he could only, well, put some powder on a wound or whatever it is, and it didn't do any good, you know. So Mother had a book, you know, of a lot of herbs, describing all kinds of herbs, and she'd go out once a year and pick those herbs, you know, those weeds.
Yeah.
And she knew what every individual weed was good for, and you know, and she tried it and get it ready and put it away, and whenever it was necessary, she used it.
Mm-hmm.
And that way there was no one sick. But when a real what you call epidemic comes through, you know, why she couldn't do anything about that. And you know, there was 12 children in our family altogether, and only 5 of them was left over.
My
and
goodness.
Well, one sister of mine died that was 2 years older than I on typhoid fever, and that's when I got typhoid fever after that.
Yeah.
And they put that was diphtheria and cholera and all kinds of stuff, you know, that was going around. And they put sometimes two children in one casket, you know,
Isn't that awful?
buried and all this and that. And of course, only a few of us left over. There's 2 brothers and 2 of my brothers, and Lydia and Martha, and that other sister of mine that died before me on typhoid fever. Her and I could get along very good.
Mm-hmm. What was it like growing up as a young child before the war?
Well, a long time before the war. You mean the First World War?
Yeah.
When I was a kid, about 6, 7 years old, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, you see, in the olden times years ago, I guess it was that way all the way around through the world, that the parents, the idea was that children should not be heard, but, well, how do they say in that?
Seen but not heard?
Seen but not heard, you know. And it told and obeyed what they've been told, and go ahead and do it. There was no such a thing as communication with parents and children, you know. The children's ideas didn't mean anything, you know. Like, well, you don't understand German, so I won't say it, but there's a word for it. She always said that, Mother said that too, you know. Of course, she was lived at those days, you know, and she said the Kinsville is Drexware.
There's nothing.
Children's will isn't worth anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they should not even
Shouldn't even be heard, huh?
be heard, you know.
Yeah.
They should do what they're
That's
supposed
too bad.
to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, in my childhood, when I was 7 years old, I was watching cows, you know, and they took kids out of the school in order for that one purpose, you know. You couldn't go to school because there was work to be done at home, and if I wouldn't have watched the cows, they would have had to hire somebody, you know. So I've been watching cows until they sold the farm, you know. It's not in the other recording, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't record that in there. I just made the overall outlook on how it was. But I've been watching cows for a couple of years, you know, and that's all I did. And if anything was there that I didn't like, why I just had to swallow it up. I couldn't say I don't like this or like that, you know.
Yeah.
I want to play, you know, and heck, no, there was no such a thing. And then when they sold the farm, and the reason they sold the farm is because my oldest brothers went to the United States, and then these kids that died, you know, that should have filled in the gap, they were not there. We was all little small. I was the oldest one, you know, and
There's nobody left to do the work, huh?
Dad didn't want to work the farm. He could have walked behind the plow on the farm, you know. He could have done that because he don't have to bend over, you know.
Yeah.
It would have done, the exercise would have done him good. But and he hired a young man to thought he'd keep on farming, and well, the food, the way they handled it, some of the farmers, you know, big farmers, they had the meat on the table and all this and that, you know, and I guess the young man was used to that, and he didn't like it because it was only soups all the time and all this and that, you know, and he quit. So, and the wages that they paid those days, it was just about the clothes that they needed and all this and that, just with a little money, you know, during the year. They hired them by the year, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And if they quit, why, they wouldn't get anything at all. Only, well, if they got something before they quit, why, that was their own. That was all right. If not, why, they just had to quit and get out of the... And that was their own fault, saying that was their own fault because they quit. You can't give you anything when you quit. You don't.
They didn't have any unions back there, did they?
Yeah, and so you see, the farming didn't go very good. I wasn't old enough to hold the plow, so they had built houses in town, you know, and we had three. Well, one house wasn't very big, but
he built houses to sell to other people,
Two houses
did he?
was pretty good size because there was about 4 departments, four what you call apartments in each building, you know, and they was getting along pretty good. They get the rent and all this and that, but Mother was used to being a farmer woman and used to milking cows, and she wasn't satisfied just sitting around not doing anything, you know. So they had to go and buy a place again so they could have cows and hogs and all that at the same time they had the houses. And so then, too, I was old enough, was getting to be 13, 14 years old. I could use the horses and do some plowing, so that's what they did. And give us something to do, so we didn't have a chance to do anything foolish, you know.
Yeah, keep you out of trouble.
Keep you occupied and keep you working, you know.
Yeah.
And Lydia was getting up there too, so she could do something, help mother and all this and that. You hear Lydia complaining every once in a while that the women had to work like slaves, which they did.
Yeah.
In those days, the women, they had an awful hard time, but they get used to it and they like it. And so that's the way it was. And well, when I got to be 14 years old, I liked horses so much, you know, and I worked the horses and I did some plowing and all that. And the neighbor was a young couple. They just got married, and he took up some land. They couldn't buy land in Russia and Ukraine. Just take up some land, you know, and it was all stumps, you know. And if he had to want to make some hay, he had to cut it in between the stumps and make hay that way. But in order to live, he had to be on the road hauling cordwood or stones or whatever they used to haul with a team of horses, and he was all alone, and he had only real little horses, little team of horses, and he needed some help once in a while and some company. So he asked my dad whether he'd let me go with him to go on the road to haul stuff, you know. And heck, I was hauling cordwood. I liked to do that. I was happy to do it, to go out with a team, you know. And well, that's included in my childhood, you know.
Yeah.
And I was doing just like a man, a grown-up man, you know. Boy, I couldn't. There wasn't anything better that I could like more than working with horses, you know.
Yeah.
So I'd get up early in the morning when it was dark, you had to take off, and in the wintertime, naturally, the days are short, you know.
Yeah.
And take off with the team, you know, go with the other man. And heck, I was happy to do it, you know.
Yeah.
Stay out there all day, take my food along, my lunch, and
You were in seventh heaven, huh?
yeah, I was happy.
Yeah.
But as far as childhood is concerned, there was no playing around, you know,
Yeah.
at any time.
Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was real interesting, Dad, and I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy hearing it.
That's about the end of it.
Okay, we'll stop then.